A wheel was born under a sky split by lightning and whispering winds. The midwife who caught her cried out not in pain, but in awe, for the child's eyes opened the moment she arrived, wide and unblinking, staring into the air like she already knew the shape of the world. Her mother, Nwando, clutched her tightly, already sensing this child would bring both blessing and trouble. As the villagers gathered to see the newborn, they quickly stepped back. Awil's eyes were the color of storm water and carried a quiet that silenced the room. Old women whispered, "She sees what should not be seen." From the start, Awil was different. As a toddler, she pointed out spirits no one else could see. She giggled at people's secrets before they spoke, and cried when future tragedies loomed over their heads like vultures. Her father once asked her where his lost knife was, and she calmly told him it was in the mouth of a snake behind the yam barn. When he went to look, he found it exactly as she said, the blade gleaming beside a coiled serpent. After that, even her own family handled her with quiet caution. By the time Awil was 10, no one in the village looked her in the eyes. Children avoided her shadow. Women crossed themselves when she passed. Men made excuses not to speak to her. But despite their fear, none could deny that Awil's words always proved true. She warned of floods and the river rose. She predicted harvest failures and the crops withered. Even when she tried to stay silent, visions came uninvited. Dreams of war, of weddings, of death. She tried to close her eyes to sleep longer, to look down, but still the visions came. One day, while fetching water from the river, Awil stopped mid-step. Her jug crashed to the ground. She whispered, "A stranger comes wearing gold. His tongue is sweet, but his heart leaks shadow." The other girls ran away, muttering that she was cursed again. But Awil stared down the path for a long time, her heart sinking. That same week, a royal procession came through the village. Horses clad in red silk. Guards beating drums. A golden palanquin in the middle. And inside it, Prince Ozoma, son of the Oba of the Southern Isles. He had heard rumors of a girl in the quiet forest village who could see beyond flesh and stone, one who saw spirits and perhaps even the gates of death itself. His curiosity burned brighter than caution. When he stepped out and saw Awil watching him from under a tree, he smiled as if they were already old friends. "You are the one they whisper about," he said, offering a hand. Awil did not take it. She tilted her head, peering past the prince's smile into the strange haze that clung to him, shifting shadows that curled around his shoulders like jealous pets. "You carry a mirror that doesn't show your face," she said quietly. "Your words shine, but your intentions crawl." The prince only chuckled, amused. He was not used to being spoken to like that. But rather than anger him, Awil's defiance intrigued him more. He spent 3 days in the village, asking questions about her visions, watching her from a distance, trying to understand the girl who feared nothing but her own knowing. He offered her family gold, silks, and land if they would let Awil return with him to the palace. "She will be honored," he promised. "Kept safe. Treated like a treasure." Her mother was torn. The villagers encouraged it. Better she be gone than haunt their homes with her warnings and wide eyes. Even Awil said nothing, simply looking at the sky as if awaiting a sign. On the 4th night, she whispered to her mother, "The prince wants what I did not offer. If I go, I will not return the same." Her mother wept, but her father accepted the gold. And so Awil left her village behind, sitting in the prince's palanquin, her eyes never blinking as they passed trees, rivers, and things no one else saw. Spirits danced beside the road, whispering warnings. Some reached out to touch her, but she kept still. When they reached the royal city, Awil saw the palace not as a monument of stone and power, but as a hive of secrets, where ambition dripped like honey and ghosts walked boldly in daylight. The prince welcomed her like a guest, offering food, silk robes, golden anklets. But he never stopped watching her. Every time she spoke of what she saw, he leaned closer. Every time she predicted an event, like the sudden illness of a noble or the collapse of a tower wall, he smiled like a man counting coins in a hidden box. One evening, she told him that a maid's unborn child would die before dawn unless moved away from the north wing. The prince moved the girl without questioning. By morning, the wing had collapsed in a freak storm. "You are more than gifted," he said, eyes gleaming. "You are a jewel carved by the gods." But Awil began to feel drained. Her visions grew more frequent, more violent. Her sleep was haunted. Sometimes she would wake with blood on her nose. She saw her own body covered in wax. She saw a shadow slicing light from her eyes. She saw the prince standing over her, his face full of triumph and sorrow. Still she said nothing. She waited. Then came the night when the prince invited her to his private chamber. He told her gently that the kingdom was at risk. War was brewing, he said. He needed her to help see the outcome. She replied that no war would come for 20 years, but the prince's hands trembled. I need certainty, he said. I need your sight, always. His voice dropped. You see the future, but I want it for myself. Awil looked at him, her storm-gray eyes deep and unreadable. You want my sight, not my soul. I need both, he whispered. That night the palace lit no lamps. But through the halls, Awil's scream echoed like thunder on water. The next morning the prince stood before the court with a calm smile. He announced that the seer had been granted a divine trance. She speaks no more, he said, but she now sees for the kingdom alone. And in a far wing of the palace, Awil sat with her eyes missing, 2 white cloths wrapped around her face. Her mouth did not move. But deep inside, her vision still burned brighter than ever. For though her eyes were gone, Awil now saw without limits, through flesh, through stone, into hearts, into endings. And in the fire of her pain, she saw clearly one thing. The prince had stolen her sight, but she had seen the hour of his fall. And so she waited, her breath steady, her spirit seeing what no man could hide. The story was far from over. The sun rose high over the village the day Prince Amrin arrived, casting golden light on every rooftop and every curious eye that peeked out from thatched windows. His caravan shimmered like molten metal, horses cloaked in silk, guards as still as carved stone. Word spread like wind. He was the Golden Prince, son of a powerful king from beyond the Red Hills, known not only for his wealth but for his fascination with the mystical, the unseen, the unexplainable. His interest in the girl called Awil was no secret. Travelers had carried whispers from her village for seasons, of a girl with pale silver eyes who never cried, never laughed too long, and never said what you wanted, only what you feared. Awil stood at the edge of the village square, where elders lined up in their ceremonial wrappers to greet the prince. Her feet were bare. Her face was calm. But her eyes, clouded though they seemed, twitched slightly when his horses came into view. He does not bring just questions, she murmured, speaking to no one in particular. He brings need. Prince Amrin descended from his horse in a robe of embroidered suns. He smiled as though he had already conquered the place with charm alone. He kissed babies, laughed at the chief's jokes, and handed out trinkets made of jade and ivory. Yet when his gaze found Awil, his steps slowed. She stood out not because of beauty but because she did not look at him. She did not bow. She simply tilted her head, like she could hear a song no one else knew. So this is the one who sees beyond? He asked the chief in a low voice, though loud enough for Awil to hear. She sees too much, muttered the old man, eyes flicking toward her uneasily. But yes, that's her. Later that day, under the baobab tree where disputes were often settled and stories retold, Amrin asked to speak with Awil alone. The village watched in silence as he approached her, a smile warm enough to melt fear on anyone else's face. She did not flinch. I've heard of you, Awil, he said, sitting beside her on the woven mat. They say your eyes are like twin moons in a clear sky, that you see truth even when truth hides. I see what I must, she replied, not turning to him. Sometimes I wish I didn't. He chuckled, resting his hands on his knees. You know why I've come. She nodded once. To take something. Amrin's smile faltered, only for a breath, before returning like a mask well fitted. Not to take. To exchange. I offer gold, silk, lands, anything. In return, show me what only you can. Prove your gift. I do not prove things, Awil said, her voice low. I only speak what is already there. Then speak now. A silence stretched long between them, like the pause before lightning. She finally turned her face toward him. Her eyes, though cloudy and pale, held a depth that rooted him in place. You were once a boy who buried his brother's bird, she said softly, because you thought it whispered secrets your father did not tell. And now you are a man who fears what hides in corners, beneath royal silk and golden crowns. You do not seek truth. You seek permission to ignore it. The prince paled slightly. No one outside the palace had known about the bird. It had spoken in dreams, his brother had said. A silly thing until it died. Until it stopped whispering things no one should know. Amrin stood slowly, dusting his robe. You speak riddles, girl, he said with forced laughter. But I like riddles. She said nothing more, only returned her gaze to the tree. The next morning, Prince Amrin appeared again, this time not alone. With him came 3 drummers and a woman cloaked in beads who was said to read bones. A celebration, he declared, in honor of the seer who lives among you. Laughter, palm wine, dancing. He gave the village joy they had not seen in months. The villagers, once wary, began to soften. They called him generous. They called him a friend. Only Awil remained distant. She sat at the edge of the circle, feet dipped in a bowl of water, staring at the flames like they spoke a forgotten tongue. When Amarin approached her again that night, he carried something in his hand, a small golden orb, etched with strange symbols. "I brought this from the northern temple," he said. "They say it listens. I want you to touch it." Awil did not move. "Why?" "To test something," he said. "To test you." She looked at the orb, her eyes flickering briefly. "It will scream." "What?" She rose, walking away without another word. The orb did scream. Not that night, but the next morning when Amarin placed it beside her sleeping mat. A high, wailing sound woke the village at dawn. It cracked the air like breaking ice. When the people rushed to see, the orb had split in two, and Awil sat unmoving beside it, blood trickling from her ears. She wiped it away with her sleeve. "You still want proof?" she whispered to the prince. He stared at her, then nodded. "I want your gift." The words carried weight they should not have. She blinked once. Then again. Her lips parted as though to argue, but something inside her paused. She looked toward the east, toward the trees beyond the river, and murmured, "You will have it. But not in the way you hope." He smiled again like a victor. "Then let's begin." For the next few days, Amarin did not leave the village. He stayed close to Awil, asking her to tell him of kings yet unborn, of wars not yet fought, of hidden enemies wearing friendly faces. She spoke, but her answers came slower. Her voice grew quieter. Her eyes seemed dimmer. One evening, as the last of the red sun bled into the horizon, Amarin said, "I wish to see with your eyes. Just once." She turned to him, her breath shallow. "You are not ready for that." "Make me ready," he said. "I will give you anything." "No," she whispered. "You will take everything." He didn't sleep that night. The next morning when the villagers gathered, they noticed something strange. Awil no longer blinked. Her face was expressionless. Her eyes, still open, no longer moved. She sat still, breathing slowly like a doll carved from softwood. The prince was gone. In his tent were empty scrolls, torn feathers, and the small broken orb, now covered in black ash. No one spoke of it aloud, but a chill fell over the village like fog. Awil's mother wept silently beside her daughter, who sat as though her soul had stepped slightly aside. And from somewhere in the woods, near the river's bend, a new story began to whisper, of a prince whose dreams now burned with a girl's silver eyes, and of a vision not borrowed but stolen. The sacred festival of Ojuoro had always been a day of joy in the village. Drums beat like heartbeats, masqueraders twirled in clouds of dust, and the sky was painted with vibrant fabrics tied from tree to tree. It was said that on this day the veil between worlds thinned, and those who listened could hear the ancestors speak through the wind. For the first time, Prince Amarin stood among the villagers, a smile as polished as the gold on his wrists, his gaze often resting on Awil. Awil sat quietly under the old kola tree, her woven mat worn at the edges, her face tilted to the wind as though it whispered to her. Though blind from birth in appearance, her sight had always reached beyond. She saw the lies woven in laughter, the hidden hands of betrayal, and the shadows that clung to men like cloaks. The villagers had feared her once, but Amarin had changed that. He had called her gifted, had bowed to her, spoken gently, and asked questions that made even the wind pause. On the eve of the festival, he asked her to bless a golden bowl he brought from the palace. For protection, he said. She had held it, her fingers tracing the rim, and murmured a chant. That night, Amarin smiled in the dark, his eyes reflecting the firelight not as warmth but as hunger. When the dawn of the festival broke, Amarin declared a surprise. He wanted to honor Awil before the village. "A seer of her kind deserves more than whispers," he said. "She shall sit on the festival throne today beside me." The elders murmured in agreement. Awil was hesitant but agreed when her grandmother touched her hand and whispered, "Let them see you as the light we know." They dressed her in fine cloth, red and gold, the colors of truth and honor. She walked to the festival square guided by the wind, for even the breeze bent to her spirit. Amarin took her hand before the crowd and announced, "Let us bless her eyes before the gods, so her vision may serve the kingdom." The villagers clapped. Drums thundered. Awil smiled faintly, she did not see the knife in his words. The ritual was staged with incense, chants, and fire. Awil sat at the center, hands open, trusting. Amarin circled her with a white cloth, whispering old-tongue prayers. Only the wind noticed how his shadow grew sharp. When the final chant ended, Amarin stepped forward with a bowl of dark water. He claimed it would cleanse her spirit. Instead, he leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for your gift." Before Awil could understand, pain like white lightning struck her face. She screamed, but the drums swallowed her voice. The world twisted. Then nothing. When she awoke, the sky had no color. Her world had always been filled with spirits and glimpses of tomorrow, but now there was only stillness. No visions, no whispers, no flickers of truth. Just the soft sobbing of her grandmother and the fading echo of Amarin's voice as he declared, "The gods have taken her eyes for themselves." But they had not. He had. Back in the palace, Amarin stood before a mirror, the eyes of Awil gleaming from the gold circlet he now wore. They did not look dead. They shimmered with power. In private, he stared into them and whispered, "Show me what you showed her." But the crown remained silent. The village mourned Awil's sacrifice. They said the gods had chosen her, that her gift had been taken for higher use. But those closest to her noticed the change. Awil no longer spoke of shadows. She no longer tilted her head to listen. She was silent. Empty. Her grandmother wept every night beside her, whispering, "He took your gift, child. But he does not know what he truly stole." And the wind, once so playful, began to turn cold. In the weeks that followed, strange things happened in the palace. Mirrors cracked when Amarin wore the crown. Whispers echoed through halls even when no one spoke. Servants reported seeing shadows crawl along the walls, and some claimed the crown blinked. Amarin laughed at first, calling them fools. But deep down he knew, the gift he had stolen was not his to keep. Back in the village, Awil sat beneath the kola tree once more. But now, her face was tilted not in listening, but in waiting. Though she no longer saw spirits, a deeper sense had awakened in her, a knowing, a cold clarity. Her blindness had not made her less. It had made her other. Amarin had stolen what was divine, but he had forgotten what every seer learns early. Sight is not vision, and the spirit cannot be plucked like fruit. The last words Awil spoke that month chilled even the oldest of elders. Her grandmother had asked, "Child, what do you see now?" Awil had replied in a whisper, "I see a prince crowned in stolen light, and a darkness that walks behind him." That night, the wind rose again, carrying her voice farther than ever before. After the sacred festival, the village spoke of Awil in hushed tones. Some called her a martyr, others a curse. But no one dared speak of what truly happened, how Prince Amarin had walked away with a crown that glowed, and how Awil, once a light among them, now sat in silence, hollow and still. Her grandmother, once her guardian and closest ally, grew frail with grief. Every night, she lit a small lamp by the mat where Awil lay, whispering to the ancestors for her granddaughter's strength to return. But Awil remained quiet, her eyes covered in white cloth, her soul a ghost adrift in her own body. One evening before the cock's cry, the villagers awoke to a strange silence. The lamp had burned out, the mat was empty, and the door was open. Awil was gone. Her grandmother's cries pierced the dawn, calling into the wind for her child. Search parties were sent, voices echoing through the hills. But no trace of Awil was found, no footprints, no broken branches, not even a whisper. It was as if the earth had swallowed her. Weeks passed. Then rumors began. Children playing by the forest's edge claimed they saw a woman in red and gold walking among the trees. She moved without stumbling, though roots and rocks littered the path. Her feet barely touched the ground, and her face, though turned away, shimmered like moonlight on water. Hunters came back with stories of seeing her sitting beneath great trees, her hands open as birds fed from her palms. Some said the wind stopped when she walked past. Others claimed even the leopards bowed their heads in her presence. The elders dismissed it as ghost stories. But then came the evidence. A wounded boy, lost in the forest for 3 days, returned unharmed. He spoke of a soft voice guiding him, of cool hands tending to his fever, and of a song that lulled him to sleep each night. She walked without falling, he said, his eyes wide. Even though she could not see, the forest moved for her. Another woman, whose child had vanished near the riverbank, found the girl days later sleeping beside a circle of stones and wildflowers. The child spoke of a woman who hummed lullabies and kept away the cold with a cloth that smelled like old prayers. The story spread. The villagers, once afraid of Awil's gift, began to call her something new, the woman who walked without falling. But deep in the forest, the truth was stranger than the rumors. Awil had not wandered blindly. On the night she left, the wind had called her name. Not with words but with feeling, grief, anger, and a pull that tugged at her bones. She followed it, step by step, though her eyes were hollow and her heart heavy. The forest did not resist her. Branches bent to let her pass. Roots shifted. The path, though unseen, seemed to shape itself beneath her feet. For days she wandered, led by whispers. Not the visions of old, but something deeper, a sound beneath sound, a memory buried in the earth. Her stomach ached with hunger, her lips cracked, but still she walked. At night, she curled beneath leaves, listening. Insects sang to her. The trees told her stories. And in dreams, she saw the eyes that had been taken, floating in gold, watching a prince who could not sleep. On the seventh day, she reached a clearing surrounded by giant irako trees. At its center was a pool, still and black as obsidian. A wheel knelt beside it, cupping her hands into the water. But instead of drinking, she heard it, a voice neither male nor female, old and eternal. "Do you seek revenge?" it asked. "No," she whispered. "Do you seek your eyes?" "No." "What then, child of sight?" A wheel placed her hands on her chest. "I seek the path that cannot be seen. I want to walk where others fall." The pool rippled. From its surface rose a mist shaped like a woman with no face. She circled the wheel 3 times, then vanished. From that moment on, a wheel felt a shift. Though her eyes were gone, her balance sharpened. Though the spirits no longer spoke in visions, she felt their presence in the rhythm of the leaves, in the movement of air, in the twitch of the soil beneath her toes. She could not see, but she knew where to place each foot. She could not hear voices, but the world spoke in silence. The forest adopted her, not as a guest but as kin. Animals began to follow her. A doe nuzzled her fingers. Monkeys tossed fruits into her lap. Even snakes coiled around her feet without harm. Her clothes wore thin, but her skin remained uncut. Rain never soaked her unless she invited it. Days turned to weeks. A wheel no longer felt hunger nor pain. She learned to listen with her bones, to speak without sound. The world around her had become her eyes. Back in the village, the talk of the woman who walked without falling stirred something ancient. The elders began to burn herbs at crossroads. The priestess consulted her shells and frowned, saying, "There is a spirit among us, born in flesh, lost in theft, rising in silence." Still no one dared to seek a wheel. The last time they'd touched her destiny, they had watched her be broken. But Amarin, far away in his palace, began to feel the consequences. The crown, once glowing, now burned against his skin. His sleep was riddled with nightmares, of trees closing in, of feet chasing him without sound, of a blind girl whose gaze saw through his bones. The eyes in the crown began to weep blood. His advisors urged him to remove it, but he refused. "Power has its price," he said through gritted teeth. Yet the longer he wore it, the more twisted he became. His reflection no longer showed a prince. It showed a boy hiding from something he could not name. One night, during a storm, he screamed in his chamber, clawing at the crown. He heard footsteps echoing through the halls, soft and steady. When he flung the doors open, there was no one. But the smell of cola leaves filled the air, and the wind whispered a name, a wheel. In the forest, a wheel stood at the edge of a cliff, arms open. The wind swirled around her like a shawl. Her eyes were gone, but she smiled, not in joy but in understanding. She had become something more than what she was born to be. The girl who saw spirits had become the woman they followed. The girl who was feared had become the one the forest loved. The girl who had fallen had risen into the unseen. She turned and began walking again, her feet never slipping, even on wet rock. She did not stumble, did not hesitate. The world beneath her moved with her rhythm. She had found her path, not of revenge, not of sorrow, but of balance. A path only those without sight could follow. A path made for the one who no longer needed to see. And still, behind her, the wind carried her name. Not as warning, as promise. Amarin sat on the marble throne, draped in gold robes and crowned with the glittering artifact that held a wheel's stolen eyes. The room was silent except for the rustle of the wind against the palace walls, but within his skull, there was no peace. The crown was supposed to be a symbol of dominance, of divine insight and power. But now it pulsed on his head like a second heartbeat, heavier each day, whispering to him when no one else was near. At first he thought it was fatigue. Long hours of court affairs, secret rituals, and the guilt he buried beneath royal duties. But soon he began to see what others could not. Every time he passed a mirror, the reflection didn't follow. His mouth would move, the image's mouth would not. Sometimes he looked into the glass and saw a wheel's face where his should be, her empty sockets leaking smoke, her smile not sad, but knowing. The crown's weight grew unbearable. On certain nights he couldn't remove it. His hands would tremble near the golden frame, and the moment his fingers touched the metal, his vision swam with flickers of fire and flood. He'd fall to the ground, clutching his skull, while guards outside pretended not to hear his screams. Servants began avoiding the throne room. Some swore they saw the crown glowing faintly in the dark, the stolen eyes moving ever so slightly. One girl fainted after claiming the eyes had blinked at her. Amarin punished her for spreading madness, but inside he feared she wasn't wrong. Then the dreams began. Each night he walked through a forest he had never visited, but which felt oddly familiar. The trees whispered in a wheel's voice, their leaves rustling her name. He heard drums, soft and low, like the heartbeat of the earth. And in the center of a clearing, always the same, a wheel stood with her back turned, head tilted toward him, though blind. When he called to her, she only said one thing: "You cannot see what you stole." One morning he woke up to find blood on his pillow. Not his blood. Not from a wound. Just two neat drops beneath the crown, as if the eyes had wept crimson tears in his sleep. His advisors noticed the change. Amarin grew withdrawn, paranoid. He kept curtains drawn, flinched at whispers, and demanded no one speak of the seer he once brought from the village. But rumors spread faster than fire in a dry season. Some said the crown was cursed. Others believed Amarin had traded something sacred, and now the gods wanted repayment. During an important council meeting, a nobleman dared to question the prince's state of mind. "We are ruled by a man haunted by shadows," he said. Amarin's laughter cut through the hall, sharp, manic. He stood and the crown shifted slightly. Everyone swore they saw the eyes glow, and for a brief moment the nobleman gasped, stared into the prince's crown and collapsed. He didn't die. But he never spoke again. And his eyes, they turned gray, dull like fogged glass. The council begged Amarin to discard the crown. But he refused. He claimed it gave him visions of future threats, of enemies in disguise. He said it whispered strategies in his ear, helped him stay one step ahead. But behind closed doors, Amarin couldn't sleep more than an hour without seeing flames. He began hearing voices even while awake, sometimes from the crown, sometimes from the walls, always in a wheel's voice. One night he awoke gasping, soaked in sweat. At the foot of his bed stood a boy no older than 7, barefoot and wearing ceremonial village beads. The child pointed at the crown and asked, "Why does it cry, my prince?" Then vanished into thin air. Amarin tore the room apart searching for him, but the boy had never existed. Desperation clawed at Amarin. He summoned mystics, foreign priests, even forbidden river witches. They performed rites, lit sacred fires and chanted old names. But every time they neared the crown, the flames died. One which went blind on the spot. Another screamed, "There is a soul trapped in your gold." Amarin denied it all. He barked at his guards, punished dissenters, doubled the palace security, but still each night the whispers returned. They said things he couldn't bear to hear. "The eyes are not yours. Sight taken turns inward. Her truth lives where your lies rot." The worst came during a royal feast. Dancers twirled, drums echoed, wine flowed. Amarin tried to forget. But a new performer arrived, veiled and cloaked in shimmering cloth. No one recognized her, but her voice as she sang cut through the noise like a blade, low, melodic, haunting. The room quieted. And she sang of a girl whose eyes were stolen, who saw beyond life, and whose vision cursed the crown of the man who betrayed her. Amarin stood furious. "Stop her," he yelled. But when the guards reached the stage, she was gone. Just vanished, as if the air swallowed her whole. The feast ended in silence. And the next morning the crown would not come off at all. Amarin clawed at it, pulling until his scalp bled. But the crown stayed, as if fused to his head. He began screaming at servants, claiming they were spirits in disguise. He refused food unless it was tasted first. His eyes grew sunken, skin pale. He muttered to himself, rocking back and forth on his throne. One day he wandered to the temple and collapsed before the altar, whispering, "She watches, even now. She sees through me." No priest dared touch him. In the days that followed, the palace fell quiet. No decrees. No orders. The throne room remained locked. Whispers in the market said the prince had gone mad. Others said he was not alone in that room. Finally, a maid broke her silence. She had peeked through the keyhole. "The prince sits still," she said, trembling. "But the eyes in the crown, they don't." They called her the oracle in the mist. Deep within the jungle where the trees held secrets older than memory, a wheel lived in a hut surrounded by vines that glistened like silver when the fog rolled in. Her home was woven from roots and time, barely visible to those without purpose. and those who wandered in by accident never found their way again. Only the desperate, the broken, or the cursed came seeking her, and the mist knew who was worthy. A wheel had not spoken to a villager in years, yet her name was never far from anyone's mouth. The girl who had once been blinded by royalty, left to rot in silence, had become a whisper among warriors and elders. She sees what we dare not. They would say it quietly, afraid her spirit might overhear. No one knew how she survived, but everyone feared the answer. Children were warned never to follow the mist too far. It leads to the woman with no eyes, their mothers would whisper. And she knows what you've done before you do it. Still, when the need outweighed the fear, when a child vanished or a goat refused to stop screaming, or a man dreamed of fire night after night, they ventured into the jungle. And sometimes they returned with knowledge they never asked for. The stories were strange. One man claimed he was healed of a curse simply by sitting in silence before a wheel's door. A woman said she asked the oracle if her husband would stop drinking, and a wheel told her where his body was buried, weeks before it was discovered. Some wept in gratitude. Others wept in horror. All said the same thing: she saw everything even without eyes. But a wheel didn't see with her eyes. Her vision came in colors no one else could name. In the pulse of roots. In the way the mist moved around a lie. In the hush of wind when a soul stepped wrong. The animals had become her messengers. Birds who sang of coming storms, snakes who whispered of betrayal, panthers who followed those with death on their heels. She walked with them, though her feet touched nothing. She moved through the forest as if she had roots beneath her skin. Her dreams had changed too. What once had been glimpses of futures now became endless rivers of time. She didn't just see what would happen, she saw what had been twisted. Threads stolen from fate. Paths that should never have been crossed. And most often she saw the crown. It came to her in dreams first, Prince Amaran's crown, now encrusted with her stolen sight. The gold was melting. The jewels screamed. Her eyes, bound in iron, saw more now than they ever had on her face. They showed the prince horrors he hadn't earned and truths he couldn't bear. She knew his footsteps before he took them. Knew his heartbeats before he heard their echo. She felt his fear every time he looked in a mirror. And so she waited. She did not chase him. She didn't send curses or call down storms. She simply let the world spin toward its own punishment. The forest knew what to do. She became a guardian of balance. The villagers thought she was punishing them when their secrets were exposed, but she wasn't. She was simply a mirror. A mirror that no longer needed eyes. One dusk, as the jungle bled gold and the shadows lengthened like questions, a child arrived. A boy no older than 10, barefoot and shivering. He had walked through miles of thorns and whispered prayers to trees that didn't answer. But the mist had let him through. That meant something. A wheel sat by her fire, stirring a pot of herbs. She didn't turn when he entered. She never turned. "You may sit," she said, her voice soft like leaves underfoot. The boy obeyed, eyes wide. "Are you the oracle?" "I am what the world remembers when it forgets everything else," she answered. He didn't understand, but he didn't ask her to explain. Instead, he reached into a pouch tied around his neck and pulled out a scrap of velvet. A scrap embroidered with golden thread. A piece of royal robe. "My mother is dying," he whispered. "She says the prince is cursed. That he took something and the forest wants it back. She said you'd know." A wheel didn't speak. She leaned toward the fire, holding the velvet scrap over the flames. It didn't burn. Instead, it shimmered, and in the rising smoke, faces appeared, some screaming, some silent. The boy gasped. "The prince does not own what he carries," she said finally. "And what he carries is unraveling the world around him. Every step he takes echoes into other souls. Can you stop him?" A wheel smiled. "He is already stopping himself." The boy looked confused. "Sometimes," she continued, "the punishment is not fire or blade. It is knowing. It is seeing too much too fast. It is being trapped inside truth with no escape." She stood slowly. Her face turned toward the east, though her eyes had long been hollow. "He comes. The wind carries his regret. Will you kill him?" "No," a wheel said. "He will ask me to." The boy swallowed, unsure whether to be afraid for the prince or for himself. But a wheel placed a hand gently on his head. "Go. Your mother's soul will rest tonight. Her fear is lifted." As the boy vanished into the mist, a wheel turned back to her hut. Inside, the fire pulsed blue. A sign. He was close now. That night, the jungle held its breath. Even the wind refused to move. The moon hovered behind thick clouds as if unwilling to witness what came next. And still she waited. She didn't arm herself. She didn't chant. She sat, blind and whole, waiting for a prince who had broken her, and would now beg for her mercy. When Prince Amarin arrived, his robes were in tatters. His once golden crown dragged in the dirt behind him, no longer fitting his head. He looked older than his years. Madness had settled in his bones like rot. The moment he stepped through the final veil of mist, he fell to his knees. "A wheel," he croaked. "I see things. I hear them. I dream of blood that never spills and voices that say my name in every tree. Make it stop. Please." She didn't rise. He crawled to her feet, laying the crown before her like an offering. "Take them back. Your eyes. Your visions. Take them. I'll give you everything, lands, armies, temples. I'll give you my own eyes if you want." A wheel reached for the crown. Her fingers didn't touch it. They hovered just above it, and the gold began to melt. Amarin screamed. Not from pain but from truth. In the firelight, a wheel's empty eye sockets glowed faintly. "I don't need your gift," she whispered. "I never did." He sobbed. "Then what do you want?" A wheel stood, taller than he remembered, her body straight, her face calm. "I want you to remember," she said. "I want you to walk without lies. To rule without theft. To live without hiding. But most of all—" She stepped closer. The mist curled around her ankles. "I want you to see what I see. Forever." The crown exploded into ash. And Prince Amarin screamed until dawn. The villagers say he returned to his palace, but he was never the same. He walked with eyes wide open, never blinking, never sleeping. He spoke to the walls, to the fire, to the mirror. And eventually he walked into the jungle again, never to return. The oracle in the mist remained. Watching. Waiting. Seeing. The halls of the royal palace had once echoed with laughter and music, but under Prince Amarin's rule, a strange silence settled like mist. From the moment the golden crown, adorned with the stolen eyes of a wheel, touched his brow, something within the kingdom began to rot. Crops wilted too early. Infants were born silent. And in the cold hours before dawn, the servants whispered of hearing screams from the throne room. Amarin sat upon his throne daily, clutching the arms as though they might run away without him. The crown weighed more with each passing hour, no longer an emblem of power but a torment of flesh. His temples ached with every heartbeat. The jewels, a wheel's eyes pale and glistening, seemed to pulse faintly as though they breathed. And when Amarin blinked, he often saw her standing at the edge of his vision, tattered, faceless, glowing with unbearable sorrow. He dismissed the court physicians when they offered herbs. He ordered the palace priests to cleanse him with sacred smoke and chants. He slaughtered goats, then cows, then a white lion. Still the whispers continued. At night, he dreamed of rivers turning red and trees bearing fruit made of ash. In each dream, a wheel stood at the center, her eyeless face turned toward him. She never spoke, but the light bleeding from where her eyes once were burned him deeper than any words could. One morning he awoke screaming, the crown fused to his head. The palace healers tried to remove it, but their blades melted at the touch. His skin had begun to grow around the metal, the flesh blistering and reforming. They tried oils, chants, even fire, but the crown would not be moved. And then came the bleeding. First from his nose. Then his ears. Then the tips of his fingers. The blood was thick and dark, but worse still, it sparkled faintly as though it held something ancient and cursed. He ordered the palace sealed, declaring himself the chosen vessel of sight. But outside the gates, the kingdom was turning. Villagers grew sick. Wells dried up. And everywhere people began to dream of a wheel. Some saw her walking through the jungle, her fingers brushing leaves that burst into flame. Others dreamed of her standing by a throne that bled rivers of gold. One child awoke with a wheel's name etched into her arm in bruises. Amarin summoned every seer, sage, and shaman he could find. They came with trembling hands and pale faces, and none dared look him in the eye. One, a mute old woman wrapped in leopard skins, stared at the crown for hours before dropping dead without a word. Another wept and said, "She is no longer blind. She sees through you now." The palace guards deserted. The cook hanged himself with a curtain rope. Even the dungeons below began to flood with black water, despite no source of it being found. Still, Amarin would not surrender the crown. He sat day after day trying to rule a kingdom that no longer obeyed him. Letters from distant provinces arrived soaked in ink and blood, their contents illegible. The land was not dying, it was reacting. A wheel had become more than a girl. She was a prophecy fulfilled, a wound given voice. Amarin began to rot. His skin peeled like bark. His nails blackened. And each day he heard the same words in a voice that echoed from the walls, the floors, the very crown itself. Return what was never yours. But he could not. He would not. Pride, rage, and shame coiled inside him like snakes, and he screamed at the sky that he was king, that her eyes were his right, that truth was not meant for girls born in mud huts. And the crown tightened again. Blood now dripped steadily from his forehead, staining the marble steps beneath his throne. No one dared clean it. No one dared speak his name aloud. One night, lightning struck the palace 3 times. The sky was split by blue fire. The throne room windows shattered, and when the guards finally dared enter, they found Amren still seated, still breathing, but his eyes were gone. Not plucked. Not gouged. Gone. His sockets were smooth, healed over like a doll's face. The crown still sat atop his head, the eyes of a wheel gleaming coldly, watching the empty court. Far away, in the deepest part of the jungle, a wheel opened her mouth for the first time in years and laughed. Her followers, those who had found her oracle hut hidden by roots and fog, heard her laughter and wept. Not from fear but from recognition. They said the laughter was not human. Not cruel. But it was knowing. And from that day on, Amren was no longer seen in public. Rumor said he still lived, shuffling through the palace halls with hands outstretched, muttering to the crown that no longer obeyed him. Others said he had become a statue, fused to the throne, bleeding slowly into eternity. But the people remembered. And they taught their children, vision is not stolen. Truth is not a trinket. And if you ever see gold that glows faintly in the dark, run. For she still sees through every stolen thing. It began with smoke. Not from the kitchens, not from incense, not even from the torchlit halls that had burned day and night for centuries. This smoke came from nowhere. It slithered through the palace corridors at dawn, dark as grief, curling under doors and around ankles like it was searching for someone. When the guards finally raised the alarm, the west wing of the palace was already aflame. The fire moved with intelligence, igniting stone as if it were dry leaves, consuming tapestries yet leaving the wooden doors untouched. No one knew how it had started. No spark, no candle, no spilled oil. But within minutes, the flames had drawn a crowd. From every hall and chamber, nobles and servants gathered, not to fight the fire, but to watch. Something about it demanded silence. And when the flames finally died, not one drop of water had touched them. It was then that they saw the words. Charred into the marble walls of the great hall, still glowing red as if freshly burned, were the letters. Return what was stolen. The characters were not written in the court's tongue, nor any known script. But every soul who looked upon them understood. Children who could not read wept when they saw it. Elders fell to their knees. The message was not made of smoke or paint. It was ash. Embedded into the wall like veins of coal, reeking of sorrow and warning. And from that day on the whispers grew teeth. The servants began telling stories, quietly in corners when the walls weren't listening. They spoke of the spirit queen who ruled the forest now. The blind girl whose eyes had been stolen. The seer who wore silence like a crown. They said she no longer wept. That her tears had dried into obsidian. That when she spoke, the wind itself bent to carry her words. Some swore they had seen her walking at the edge of the trees beyond the palace walls, wrapped in light no fire could touch. Birds fell silent as she passed. The sky darkened slightly above her head. And those who tried to follow her path found only mirrors, each one cracked and humming. Amren locked himself in the throne room. He forbade any mention of a wheel's name. He executed a maid for humming a tune she used to sing. He smashed the palace mirrors, burned every book with her village's symbol, and punished those who lit fires without permission. But the message on the wall never faded. Worse, it began to spread. A week after the palace fire, another inscription appeared, this time in the royal library across the ceiling. Truth wears the face you burned. No one admitted to seeing it appear. No one heard a sound. But when the archivists came to collect scrolls, they found the ash-written words above them, glowing faintly even in darkness. Amren fell into paranoia. He began pacing the halls at night, muttering to himself, his fingers trembling, crown tilted slightly on his skull. He scratched at the wall where the first message had appeared until his nails split. He demanded confessions, tortured his own advisors, screamed at the priest who told him the palace was cursed. He asked one with blood drying on his sleeves, "If I return the crown, will she stop?" But the priest only wept. And by morning he was gone, disappeared into thin air. The kingdom outside began to respond. Rain refused to fall. Wolves were spotted at the edge of towns, watching silently. Newborns wailed with voices too deep for their lungs. One village woke to find every tree in their forest bent westward, toward the palace. And in the villages people whispered new prayers. Not to gods, but to the woman who lived among roots and riddles. The one who had been blinded by greed and crowned by truth. A wheel, they whispered, pouring water on earth. A wheel, they said when their children dreamed of fire. A wheel, they breathed when gold lost its shine. And deep within the palace, Amarin began to hear things. He heard her voice in the crackle of torchlight, in the shuffle of sandaled feet, in the gaps between breaths. Not cruel, not angry, but present. Each night he tried to sleep, and each night his dreams were written in ash. He saw her standing on the balcony where he first announced his rule. Eyes aglow, mouth closed, fire behind her. And behind her 1,000 women, headless, faceless, nameless, all holding crowns of bone and branch. Sometimes the dream ended with her touch. A single finger brushing his cheek, and everything crumbled. His flesh, his throne, the entire world. He started wearing veils. Not to hide himself from the people, but from her. As if cloth could protect him from what he had done. But still the messages came. On the floors of his chambers. On the ceilings of his dreams. On his own hands when he woke up screaming, fingers dusted with ash that no water could wash. Return what was stolen. Return what was stolen. Return? He tried to burn the palace again. He ordered torches tossed into the library, into the prayer rooms, into the chambers she once slept in. But the flames refused to obey. They bent backward. They flickered and hissed but would not rise. And the palace grew colder for his effort. When his generals confronted him, he struck them down. When his mother came, begging him to renounce the crown, he locked her in the west wing with no food. When he tried to leave the palace, the gates would not open. Not locked. Refused. The kingdom had turned its back on him. The earth rejected his footsteps. The wind carried her voice now. And one morning when he awoke, the crown was no longer on his head. It sat beside his bed, eyes open, watching him. He screamed for the guards, but none came. He ran through the halls, barefoot and bleeding, and found the palace empty. Not dead. Just waiting. As if holding its breath for the next message. And it came. Not on the walls. Not in dreams. But from a child. A girl no older than 7. Found standing in the middle of the throne room, barefoot, eyes milky white. She opened her mouth and spoke in a wheel's voice. You cannot keep what bleeds. Then she fell, silent and unharmed, and awoke with no memory of being there. Amarin dropped to his knees. But it was not surrender. It was the slow crumbling of pride, the unraveling of a man who had swallowed power like poison and now felt it eating him from the inside out. And in the forests, where the fog curled like silk and mirrors hung from trees like fruit, a wheel smiled once more. Because he had heard her. And she was not finished. The moon hung swollen and red above the horizon, casting a strange glow upon the capital city. The air was thick with whispers that night, whispers that moved through alleyways between braziers, across stone bridges and palace corridors. At first no one saw her. They only felt something shift, like a veil had been lifted from the world. A child was the first to speak her name aloud. She walks, he said wide-eyed, pointing toward the eastern gate. The guards scoffed at the boy, but when they looked beyond the torches they too saw it. A figure cloaked in dark forest green. No shoes. No jewels. Her skin glowed faintly in the eclipse's light. She moved slowly but with purpose, each step marking the cobblestones with a faint shimmer that pulsed and then disappeared. The people gathered, silently parting as she walked. There was no trumpet, no proclamation. Yet the city trembled with knowing. A wheel had returned. Her eyes, long gone, were covered with a black silk cloth, threaded with what looked like gold dust. Her head was wrapped in a scarf the color of dried blood. In her hand she held a staff of twisted wood, smooth at the handle but cracked at the end, as if it had walked through time and fire. A circle of crows flew above her, never too close, never straying far. People knelt as she passed. Some covered their mouths. Others wept. None dared touch her. Even those who had mocked her as a girl, who had turned away when her vision unsettled them, now stared in reverent silence. They knew. This was not a woman returning, it was judgment on 2 legs. Word reached the palace before she arrived at its gates. Prince Amarin, now King Amarin, stood in the high tower, gripping the sides of his throne as if it might lift and fly away. The crown on his head, adorned with 2 pale stones that once were a wheel's eyes, pulsed with a faint heat. He felt it deep in his bones, Every time he blinked, he saw her standing in flame, smiling without lips. The voices had grown louder in the last moon cycle. They murmured riddles. They wept when he was alone. And now they screamed. "She comes," the voices said. "She comes." The palace guards opened the gates not because they were ordered to, but because they could not stop themselves. Their arms felt heavy, their spears cracked in their hands. As a wheel stepped onto the palace steps, the flames in the braziers flared upward. The eclipse above reached its darkest point, turning the sky black and red like coal blood. A wheel did not speak until she reached the throne room. She stopped just before the stairs that led to Amarin's dais. Her head tilted slightly. The silence thickened. Even the birds outside seemed to hold their breath. Then she raised her hand. "I call for the trial of fire and shadow," she said, her voice calm but filled with something older than wrath. "Let the ancestors judge." A gasp rippled through the chamber. The elder priest who had not spoken in years suddenly dropped his staff and knelt. His voice broke into song, the ancient chant of invocation. Servants fled. Amarin did not move. He wanted to run, but the crown gripped his scalp, fused like molten gold. His feet were rooted. The room darkened, not from eclipse, but from something deeper. From the walls, shadows began to stretch and curve. They gathered into forms, faces of long-dead kings, queens, warriors, children. The ancestors. Their eyes glowed with silver light. Their presence bent the room until breath itself seemed a burden. A wheel did not flinch. She stepped forward. Her bare feet left glowing prints on the cold stone. Her staff tapped 3 times, echoing like thunder in the chest. Amarin's lips trembled. "You stole what was never yours," she said, and thought pain would not echo through time. He tried to speak. "It was not theft. I honored." Silence. The shadows hissed in unison. The crown on his head began to hum, low and deep. Sweat beaded on Amarin's brow. He tried to remove it, fingers trembling, but it would not budge. It burned. A wheel lifted her head. "You took my eyes and with them, the balance. You saw only power, not purpose. You wore my sight as a jewel, not a gift. Now your kingdom withers. Now your hands bleed." Amarin dropped to his knees. "I see you in my sleep," he sobbed. "I see death, my own, again and again. I hear your voice in the fire." "You do not hear me," a wheel said gently. "You hear what watches through me." Suddenly the ancestors stepped forward. Each shadow moved without sound, circling the throne. Amarin tried to crawl away, but the floor beneath him turned to ash and smoke. His skin blistered where he touched the steps. A wheel began to chant. It was not a language the living remembered, but it stirred something in every soul present. Even the crows outside began to caw in rhythm. The crown glowed. Then it cracked. A soft sound like a child's first breath. Then a shattering. The twin stones fell from the crown, rolling across the floor toward a wheel. She did not move. The stones reached her feet, stopped, and began to melt, turning into silver tears that sank into the earth. Amarin screamed, but no one moved to help him. The throne behind him cracked down the middle. A well of black water seeped from the base. The ancestors stepped back. A wheel turned. "It is done," she said. But Amarin crawled forward, eyes wild. "Forgive me," he begged. "Please return me to who I was." A wheel paused. "You never were," she said. And with that she walked away. Her prints still glowed, but now they bled gold. The ancestors vanished. The room felt cold and hollow. And Amarin, once prince, once king, fell to the ground. When the servants returned hours later, they found him weeping into his hands, blind. The stones were gone. The crown melted. And in the years that followed, they spoke of the woman who had no eyes but saw kingdoms fall. They left offerings in the jungle. They listened to dreams more carefully. And above all, they never again tried to take what was not freely given.